Hello. The focus of this mini lecture is the Civil War, an overview. Let's get into it. All right. So we're going to talk about a few key terms that it's important to understand when it comes to thinking about the context of the Civil War era. Again, this is a class about the history of sport. However, baseball is going to happen in the Civil War. I mean, this is a big deal. I mean, the war does a lot when it comes to, it means a lot when it comes to thinking about sport and athletics and, any number of other effects during this time period. So let's get into it. First thing, slavery. I know that the majority of Southern white individuals in the generation prior to the Civil War did not own the bodies of enslaved people. However, those who did, those who were owners of enslaved persons, controlled the overwhelming majority of the Southern economy, Southern life and culture, and the whole process. At least they're trying to, maintain power over it. And if you look specifically at secession declarations of the states that will join the Confederacy, they make it abundantly clear that a thorough identification with the institution of enslavement, of owning the bodies of people, was a cause for the war. As a primary, is the main cause for the war. They are very strongly in support of this. All right. Second point for us, the Mexican-American War. The question of why the Civil War happens, of course, is over slavery. The other question, why does it happen when it happens, is because of the political fallout over the question of the extension of slavery into the territories that are going to be acquired by the United States as a direct result of the Mexican-American War. This is a war that begins in 1846, 1847, and when the United States is ultimately successful, it acquires through treaty and through payment, something called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, a significant amount of territory that had been, prior to this, 40% of the nation of Mexico. Now, as a result of acquiring this territory, questions of would the institution of slavery be extended into these territories meant that the political, for lack of a better phrase, status quo of the few decades before, all of that is kind of no longer valid. And so now there is debates over the extension of slavery and how is that process going to operate. And you have political sort of, party views on either side. And much of the story then of the 1850s is the concern and conflict over this. And so what kind of begins all this is what's called the Compromise of 1850. So after the treaty, after the acquiring of the territory, the Compromise of 1850 was an attempt to reassert some measure of stability so that conflict doesn't emerge. And this is a lot of different forms of legislation dealing with, around this time, things like California's admission to the United States, things like whether, the banning of the auction of enslaved persons in Washington, D.C. This is a legal discussion at this particular time period. The political principle of what's called popular sovereignty is going to be applied when it comes to Kansas during this particular period. And it's something that will come to be quite influential. A fairly a new law in regards to fugitive enslaved persons, the Fugitive Slave Act, is going to be a part of this time period as well, this compromise era as well. Another point for us is what's called Bleeding Kansas. So Kansas was going to be subject to what's called popular sovereignty. The idea was that those residing in Kansas could decide whether or not this would be a territory when it became a state, that it would be a space where enslavement was illegal or not. And what ended up happening is that pro slavery advocates, anti-slavery advocates travel to Kansas, and militias will form and violence will ensue. Individuals like John Brown are present in Kansas at this particular time. And so the 1850s really is a tense political time. It's a time of the Dred Scott Supreme Court case. It is a time in which really the rise of the Republican Party occurs, in which the Republican Party starts to thoroughly identify itself as an anti-slavery party along a wide variety of lines. And really, again, this fallout after the Mexican-American War and this treaty leads to these political conditions that will result in Lincoln's election in 1860 and secession that begins to occur in the aftermath of that election. Thank you so much.